And I do a lot of work with grief and death and loss. So I do a lot of work on all the light and fun stuff in life. Yeah. And a lot of the frameworks came from this. And I do a lot of work with veterans and first responders that are dealing with heavy trauma. It started first with men. And then I had some first responders come and I saw how effective it was. And then it's moved into that really strongly now. And so for the way I look at it now is I have a framework where we do through Valor, where there's three primary components of resiliency. One is the ability to reintegrate. So the reintegration is if you go to work, if you do something, a lot of times you still need to put the armor on, especially if somebody's a firefighter, police officer, ER doctor. There's a lot, construction worker. There's a lot of roles where in order to do your job effectively, you actually need to put the armor on, and it serves you. So you reintegrate from your home unit into your work environment. So the key is you need to be able to reintegrate back home. And if you do take on trauma, if you do take on things, you have to know how to build awareness around that, what to do around it. But the big key is, what is your reintegration strategy? The easy metaphor is like, how do you take the armor off to come home? Because imagine if you were walking around with armor all day, and then imagine walking into your front door and opening the door and you're coated in armor. Like imagine those knights that were just armored from head to toe, and even their faces, they just got a little slit through their eyes. And imagine walking in the door. Now imagine giving your spouse a hug. And imagine trying to hug your kids and walking out back and trying to see a sunset through a little armor. Life gets a little meaningless. So you have to know how to take the armor off to feel, which is emotion. And if you suppress the pain and the sadness and the grief, like most of us were taught, you also suppress the joy, the excitement, the passion, the happiness. So you can't suppress one without the other. So you need to learn to take the armor off. You need to learn to start to feel if you want to live a fulfilling life full of vitality. So that's one piece, is be able to reintegrate. The second piece is purification. So I like metaphors a lot. So if you think of a truck, we put this oil into the truck, which is like this golden type, substance. And then as it's taking on heavy output from the truck, it turns black, or the vehicle turns black. And if you don't change the oil, at some point your engine will seize. So if you're not doing purification practices, if you're not changing the oil out for you as an individual, eventually you'll seize. So purification is meditation, things that you transmute the energy, going out in nature. I know you do some epic retreats in the mountains where deep purification, letting things go, that process can be very, very, very helpful. Visioning quest, right? That's a purification process, deep purification. And also things like singing, dance, movement, anything creative based, right? Where you're playing music, you're feeling what you're feeling, but you're transmuting that energy into something else. And so those are the three components of purification. And the last component is regulation. And the key with regulation is we all move through a trauma response, and our bodies are built to protect us. That's why we're still alive. And when we move into a survival response, our nervous system's getting put on overdrive. And in that overdrive, we're in that fight, flight, freeze, appease. And some professions, that's what you do 24/7, right? So when you're in that high regulated state, and most of us live in so much stress where we don't realize it, but we're in heavy unregulated territory on a regular basis. So you have to know how to turn the switch off. And there's about six, there's a bunch more, but the 6 ones I usually talk about are ways to regulate is, think about this. Imagine another metaphor back to the truck. What happens when you start to run out of gas? Like, is it kind of a pain in the ass to go to the gas station and put gas in the car? You have to pay money, you have to put gas in the car. But if you don't do it, do you want to run out of gas on the freeway, or do you want to run out of gas on your trip? No, you don't want the pain of that. So you're willing to sacrifice the time, the energy, the money, and the work to put gas in your car in order to keep driving smooth. It's a very same metaphor to this. So when you're unregulated, or when you're in an activated state for too long, is when we start to break down and we get stuck on hypervigilance. And when we're there too long, that's anxiety, panic attacks, 0 to 60 hairline triggers. And then if we stay there too long, we burn out and we hit these cortisol crashes. And that's when we get depression, fatigue, exhaustion, and all these other ones. And that's where a lot of high risk behavior happens because we're trying to get back up. The body finds ways to regulate. They're just usually in addictions and all these other ways, but your body's actually serving you by regulating. So if you can become aware of when the tank's low and learn to flip the switch, you're basically accessing your vagus nerve, which is the part of your body that turns on your parasympathetic nervous system, which relaxes you. So the ways to do it are breath work, but breath work where you're breathing in for a count of, let's say 4, and breathing out for 6 or 8. So the big key is you want to be doing like 6 minutes of breathing where you're breathing out longer than you're breathing in. Second component would be touch. So that's why equestrian therapy works. Spending time with your dog or your cat, even your spouse or loved one. But if you can get touch, really helpful to regulate your nervous system, calm you down. Third one is cold water immersion. So that's why a lot of us love this cold water immersion, whether it's doing cold plunges or even just splashing cold water on 3/4 of your face, instantly starts to regulate your nervous system. Next one is just vocal cords. So singing, laughing, humming. If you could be singing on your way home in the car or humming a tune, this starts to activate your vagus nerves in part of your neck, and that can regulate it. Next one's exercise. So establish an exercise practice, whether it be the gym or, martial arts or anything that you can do, yoga, just something to get in your body because you're getting out in the body, in the nervous system. And then the last one is just being around healthy community. If you could be around a really safe tribe and community, and they're regulated, you'll start to regulate. So those are just 3 components that have been brought back from all ancient warriors did them, and we need to bring it back because we live in high stress. So again, resiliency, reintegrate back home, learn to reintegrate back home, and also communicate that with your family. If you have a heavy stress day, you need to have a heavier resiliency protocol in place to deal with that day. So COVID's going on. We have a lot of veterans that are really in a lot of pain around Afghanistan. Haiti's going on. Lots of different things going on, plus COVID. So make sure you may need increased purification practices, regulation practices, and you may need heavier reintegration rituals to come back home again, because you could have all the things in the tribe triangle in place, but if you're unregulated and you're in a heavy stress response, you're unaware. You're moving to survive. As you mentioned earlier, you're in survival mechanisms because your body says you're not safe from some past trauma. And if you can take control of that, recognize it, and start to build these practices in, it's going to be hard. You don't feel like doing it. You don't feel like breathing when you're highly unregulated. You don't feel like going out in nature on a walk. You don't feel like doing a vision quest and going with you and, sitting in nature and purifying yourself. But if you do these practices and put them into place, you get your life back, right? And you start to become like your old ways of regulating disappear, and you replace them with the new ways to fill up your tank. And then you can embrace your family and make them family practices. And that's really the highest level of it, is like, as a community, as a culture, as a family, we're all doing these practices together so that when somebody's in pain, we're not teaching them to avoid it, put it in a box, run from the pain. Instead, we're saying like, hey, you're in pain. Guess what? I get in pain too. And when I'm in pain, this is what we do. Let's breathe. Or, hey, let's breathe. Let's sit around and hold hands for a minute and let's breathe as a family. Or we can create fun games and throw a flag in the house if somebody's offline and everybody has to sit and breathe. And, so you can make it fun and you can make it a game. But if you can bring your family unit into it, if you're in a regulated state, you're calm, cool, collected. You're in the part of your brain, which is the prefrontal cortex, which is compassion, empathy, and executive function, which is like you have access to all these options. If you're unregulated, you're black and white. You're in the back of your brain, your Hulk brain, and you're in a fight, flight, freeze, appease. You're trying to survive. So you just can't function at the highest level if you're in an unregulated place. So learning how to have that self-control to regulate gives you access, gives you power, and we're around people. So how can you really function in a loving way if you don't have compassion, if you don't have empathy, and you really don't have options to like, what else could this mean right now? My spouse had a really tough day, has nothing to do with me. Like, they're offline. What can I do to support them? So instead of jumping into a fight or leaving, you now put your arm around them and say, hey, looks like you had a tough day. What do you need from me right now? And that really changes the game, because now you've aligned on all these other levels, and then you're functioning really high and you have the awareness to recognize it's usually not about each other. We're usually in a body's in a unregulated state because it's reacting to some past trauma and has nothing to do with your partner. But if we can't see it, then we end up fighting about the dishes. And now in your family unit at home, when you should be the tightest team in the supportive unit, you're now in a fight about the dishes because you're both unregulated. And so if you can recognize this and move to supporting and coming together, you now move from, fighting to intimacy, or a different level of connection where, we're a team. You got me, I got you. So it's a different level to live, where you're living from compassion and empathy.